It's 11:40 on a Tuesday night. Nora stands at her kitchen counter, still wearing the hospital badge she forgot to remove, eating cereal from a coffee mug because every bowl sits dirty in the dishwasher. She's 41. Behind her browser sits a tab from 3 hours ago where she priced a water heater. She types average 401k balance by age, reads the figure for her group, and flips the phone face down without finishing her cereal. Marcus is also 41, living 2 exits down the same highway. He saw that exact same number this morning, felt a quiet rush of pride, and drove out to go shop for a grill. Identical number, opposite Tuesdays. Here's what neither of them realizes. That number isn't describing Nora. It isn't describing Marcus. It isn't describing you. It's describing a person who doesn't actually exist. My name is Yank, and today we're going to examine the thing the retirement industry publishes every single year and then carefully avoids explaining. Let's begin with real data, because I won't call a number misleading and then refuse to show it to you. Vanguard releases a yearly report called How America Saves, built on roughly 4.6 million actual accounts. It's the closest thing this country has to an honest scoreboard. The 2026 edition just dropped, and the headline reads $167,970, an all-time record. But one page later, in the very same report, on those very same accounts, sits the median, $44,115. Nearly 4 times apart. Same data. And Vanguard doesn't hide this. They print it right there. The average lines up with roughly the 75th percentile. So when you compare yourself to the average 401k balance, you're measuring yourself against the top quarter of everyone who even has a 401k. I want to name this person, because he'll keep reappearing. Let's call him the Phantom Saver. He's the guy the headline is really about. He isn't the middle of America. He isn't the typical worker. And he isn't real. He's an arithmetic illusion, created by taking a handful of enormous accounts and spreading them evenly across everyone else. Every year, millions of people measure their real lives against him and conclude they're falling behind. While we're here, watch for one more thing. Somewhere inside your 401k right now is a number you almost certainly never picked. Someone else chose it for you, likely during your first week on the job. We'll get to who. It matters more than your balance does. So let's walk through the ages. To keep this honest, I'll only give you the median at each stage, because the median is the true middle, half above, half below. A real person actually stands there. Under 25, $2,234. Ages 25 to 34, $18,732. Ages 35 to 44, which is Nora and Marcus's bracket, $46,919. Ages 45 to 54, $78,730. Ages 55 to 64, the final stop before people actually retire, $107,269. And then 65 and up, where it drops to $103,000. It goes down. That isn't an error. That's people who stopped adding and started spending. You fill a bucket for 40 years, and the bucket doesn't get to stay full. Now here's the Phantom Saver standing beside each of those figures. Under 25, he's got $7,000 instead of $2,000. At 35 to 44, he's holding $120,000 against Nora's $47. At 55 to 64, he's got $305,000 against a real person's $107. He's roughly 3 times richer than the median American at every single age. And he's the one who gets quoted in the article. One more stat from that report, and it reframes everything: 1 in 4 participants has less than $10,000. Only 18% have more than $250,000. So let's do the one conversion that truly matters, and let's do it once so we're all using the same unit for the rest of this video. A balance is not money. A balance is a promise about future money. And the exchange rate is worse than you think. Take that 55 to 64 median, $107,000, and hand it to a 65-year-old man to buy guaranteed lifetime income. Right now, that buys about $670 a month. $670. 30 years of payroll deferrals convert into roughly a car payment. And to be clear, not a nice car. So from here on, whenever I mention a balance, I'll tell you what it pays monthly, because that's the number you'll actually be living inside of. And here's what that math looks like from the inside. It looks like a 58-year-old man who's grown strangely curious about his coworkers' retirement dates. It looks like Nora opening the water heater tab and closing it again twice, then going to bed. Now, the reason even those medians are optimistic, and they are wildly optimistic, is a data flaw so basic that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Vanguard's data comes from Vanguard accounts. Fidelity's comes from Fidelity accounts. Every one of these reports measures people who already own a 401k at that provider right now. Anyone who never cleared that first hurdle is simply invisible to the study. How many people is that? The Bureau of Labor Statistics says 72% of private industry workers have access to a retirement plan. Access, not participation. And it varies sharply by employer size, 59% at companies under 100 employees, 90% at companies over 500. Look at who actually participates, and it falls to about 53%. In leisure and hospitality, it's 17%. The person who made your lunch today isn't in the data set, not because they're bad with money, but because nobody offered them the account. The Federal Reserve confirms it from the other direction. 39% of American adults have no tax-advantaged retirement account at all. The broader survey of consumer finances, which counts every household instead of every account, puts roughly 46% at zero retirement savings of any kind. So add those people back in, and the true national median collapses towards something closer to $30,000. That's the middle of America, not $167,000. And there's a third leak nobody accounts for: the 401k was designed for a job market that quietly stopped existing. Median job tenure is now 3.9 years. For workers 25 to 34, it's 2.7. We built a stay-put instrument, handed it to a workforce that moves every 4 years, and then acted surprised. You know what happens to those accounts? 31.9 million of them have been left behind at old employers, holding $2.1 trillion, about a quarter of all 401k money in this country. Average balance, $67,000 each. So your retirement savings may not be small. It may just be scattered across 3 former employers like socks in a laundromat. Which brings me to Walter. Walter is 62. He's got over $1 million in his 401k, and every article written about people like Walter treats it as a personality trait: discipline, focus, getting up early. Hold that thought, because we're going to examine Walter's actual profile later, and it isn't what you've been told. And speaking of things you haven't been told, later in this video I'll show you a single retirement account so massive it makes every number here look like a typo. Same account type you have, same rules on paper. Once you see how it was built, you'll understand this system has 2 tiers, and only one of them was ever advertised. But first, the gap, the real one. Median household spending for Americans 65 and up is about $61,000 a year. Social Security replaces about $25,000 of it after this year's 2.8% adjustment. And the median 401k throws off somewhere between $4,300 and $5,000 a year, depending on whose withdrawal rate you trust. Add it up, roughly $29,000 of income against $61,000 of spending. The median American arrives at retirement with less than half their own expenses covered. That's not a budgeting failure. You cannot coupon your way across a $32,000 annual canyon. And it gets rougher. When Americans are asked what they think they need to retire comfortably, the answer averages $1.26 million. The median 55 to 64-year-old has $107,000. That's under 9% of the target, with about 7 years left on the clock. Nobody in that bracket is 9% of the way to a solution. They're 9% of the way to a number they invented, which is worse, because they've been measuring the distance the entire time. And one more factor almost nobody accounts for, because it hasn't happened yet. The Social Security Retirement Trust Fund is currently projected to run dry in 2032, which triggers an automatic benefit cut of roughly 22% unless Congress acts. That's not a prediction. That's arithmetic already written into the law. So that $25,000 of Social Security that's doing most of the heavy lifting in the average retirement plan has a haircut penciled in 6 years out. Here's what all of this actually feels like, because the numbers are abstract and the experience isn't. It feels like being 63 and doing arithmetic in a parking lot before a dentist appointment. It feels like your daughter asking whether you and dad are set, and hearing yourself answer, "We're fine, honey," in a tone you've clearly rehearsed. It feels like turning the thermostat down 2 degrees in February and telling yourself it's about the environment. None of that is a character flaw. All of it is the residue of a decision made around 1980, when the entire risk of your old age was transferred off employers and onto you, and nobody sent a memo. If this is landing, and you'd rather work through your real numbers with people running the same math instead of doing it alone at 11:40 on a Tuesday, I run a school community. Links in the description. It's mostly people who figured out that comparing yourself to a phantom is a losing sport. So why does the system leak? Because it's built to, and because being broke is expensive. Start with hardship withdrawals. In 2021, 2% of participants took 1. Then 3, then 4, then 5. In 2025, 6%. 4 straight years of increases. And here's the detail that got me: the median hardship withdrawal is about $1,900. Nobody is rating their retirement for a boat. 36% of those withdrawals are to stop a foreclosure or an eviction. 31% are medical. People are using their 401k as an emergency fund because they don't have an emergency fund. Workers earning under $100,000 are 3.5 times likelier to do it. And when they do, they pay a tax penalty. Congratulations! You've discovered the surcharge for being broke on the wrong Tuesday. Then the cash out. Roughly a third of participants cash out entirely when they leave a job. And the median worker leaves every 3.9 years. So the core design assumption of the product, money goes in and stays in, is being broken by a third of the customers about once per presidential term. Then fees, which are the quietest one. The Department of Labor's own illustration says a single extra percentage point in annual fees cuts your final balance by about 28% over a career. 1%. 28% of the ending number. It's a rounding error that eats a house. And then my personal favorite, which is where that mystery number from earlier lives. Auto-enrollment is now mandatory for new plans. And honestly, it works. It pushes participation from around 29% up to about 91%. But the default contribution rate is typically 3%, and people stay there forever. 3% plus a 3% match is 6, against a target of 15. It gets better. Every time you change jobs, you get redefaulted. So you spend 4 years climbing to 8%, take a better job with a raise, and get silently reset to 3%. Your income went up. Your savings rate went down. Nobody emailed you. There was no ceremony. That number, the one somebody in HR picked for you during onboarding week, while you were mostly focused on the parking situation, has quietly been your entire retirement strategy ever since. Now, the account I promised you. In 1999, Peter Thiel put under $2,000 into a Roth IRA. Same account type available to a middle school teacher. Same contribution limits printed in the same IRS publication. He used it to buy founder shares at a fraction of a penny each in a company that turned out to be PayPal. By 2019, per ProPublica's reporting on leaked IRS data, that account held $5 billion, not tax-deferred, tax-free forever. And he's not a fluke. Between 2011 and 2019, the number of taxpayers with Roth accounts over $5 million roughly tripled, to about 28,600. 497 of them averaged around $150 million apiece. Nora has $47,000. She's using the same category of account, obeying the same rules under the same annual limits. And she's playing an entirely different game on an entirely different board. The retirement system is not broken. It's working precisely as designed. The design just has two tiers, and only one of them ever got a commercial. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Yank, but balances hit records last year, so the system's working. And you're right that they did. Look at why. Vanguard's average jumped 13% in 2025. And Vanguard says plainly it was driven by market performance. The SP returned about 16%. Savings rates barely moved. So the record wasn't an achievement. It was a weather report. And weather turns. Total 401k assets nationwide already slipped from $10.1 trillion to $9.9 trillion by the first quarter of this year, which matters more when you see what the big firms expect next. Vanguard's own model projects 4 to 5% annual U.S. equity returns over the next decade. BlackRock says about 5%. Research Affiliates says around 3%, against a historical average near 10%. I'm not telling you to panic. I'm telling you that if your retirement projection assumes the last decade repeats, you're using a growth rate that the people who built your calculator no longer believe in. So what actually moves? 3 things, and none of them are inspirational. 1. The match. Average employer match is about 4.6%. And if you aren't capturing all of it, you're declining the only guaranteed return in finance. Go find out what yours is today, not this weekend. Today. 2. That default rate. Log in and look at your contribution percentage. If it says 3%, that number was chosen by a benefits administrator you've never met and never will, and it's currently your whole plan. Move it 1 point. Move it again after your next raise, when you won't feel it. 3. The limits, which went up for 2026. You can defer $24,500. 50 and over adds $8,000. 60 to 63 gets a super catch-up of $11,250. And one correction, because this gets misreported constantly, the $11,250 replaces the $8,000. It does not stack. Also new this year, if you earned over $150,000 last year, your catch-up has to be Roth. And let me be honest about that last one, instead of pretending it's useful to everybody. Fewer than 1% of workers earning under $50,000 max out their 401k. 51% of people earning over $150,000 do. Contribution limits aren't a goal for most Americans. They're a tax planning feature for people who have already won. Worth 30 seconds of your attention, but I'm not going to stand here and tell you the ceiling is your problem when the floor is. So let's return to our 3 people, because the right comparison is the whole point. Marcus has around $340,000. And here's the part one left out, roughly half of it is one position. Company stock from a decade at an employer that got acquired. Well, Marcus didn't outsave Nora. Marcus got handed a decade. He's not the hero of this story either. He just happens to be standing in the part of the distribution that drags the average up, which means Marcus's good luck is actively making Nora feel like a failure. Neither of them signed up for that. The arithmetic did it to both of them. Then Walter, the average 401k millionaire, 59 years old, 26 years in the same plan, 26 years in a country where median job tenure is under 4. Walter isn't disciplined. Walter is a survivor of a labor market that has largely stopped producing people like him. And there are about 595,000 Walters out of more than 25 million participants, under 2.5%. We've built an entire genre of financial advice around a group of people who are statistically a rounding error. And Nora has $47,000, which puts her almost exactly at the median for her age, which means Nora is not behind. Nora is the middle. She is precisely, unremarkably typical. And she spent a Tuesday night eating cereal out of a mug, feeling like she'd failed at something because a phantom told her so. Here's what she did the next morning, and it took her 4 minutes. She logged into her plan for the first time in about 6 years and looked at her contribution rate, 3%. She had never chosen it. It had been chosen for her during onboarding at a job she left in 2019, and it followed her quietly into the next one. 11 years of her working life had a number in it she'd never once looked at, set by someone whose name she doesn't know. She moved it to 6. That's it. That's the entire dramatic climax of this video. So stop asking, am I behind? That question has no usable answer. The benchmark is contaminated. The data set can't see half the country, and the average is a phantom standing at the 75th percentile wearing a name tag that says, normal. Ask this instead, what is my contribution rate, and when did I last choose it on purpose? Because your balance is a fact about the past, about the market, and about which employer happened to hire you. Your contribution rate is a fact about your life, and it's one of the very few numbers in this entire system that will actually move when you touch it. Go look at it today. If it's still whatever your employer picked for you in week 1, you never made a decision. Somebody made one for you and let you spend a decade assuming it was yours. And if you want to run your own numbers alongside people doing the same thing, our school community is waiting in the description.